So, this is a public service announcement. Before trying any new platform, test it out first. With that being said, it's time for another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC,
Batman, Wonder Woman,
Marvel,
Spider-Man,
Image,
Spawn, Saga,
Boom,
Once and Future, Power Rangers,
or whatever book or publisher you follow,
we cover them all here.
this is the place for you.
That's right, it's for everyone.
This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
Let's get it.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo. I'm back after being taken out by whatever was that bug that had me down for a couple of days. I'm back and we are here with another week and another episode of just talking comics. This week, David Pepose, comic book writer, returns to the podcast, and we're talking about a couple of his projects that are going on, as well as one that just came to an end. So we'll be talking about some of those things and what we got to look forward to, not only with what's already on shelves with Space Ghost, but also with that new volume. He's calling it Season 2, so I'm going to call it Season 2 as well, of Space Ghost, that's going to be coming out in a couple of months. And we'll be looking at some of his other projects, particularly the Captain Planet series that's currently going on over at Dynamite Entertainment, as well as the upcoming Speed Racer series that's coming out in a few months over at Mad Cave Studios. But want to say, as I mentioned in the pre-intro, I started a new platform using Google Meet for the interview that I had with David, and as I normally would do, I would check the platform to make sure I had all of the settings as I wanted it, but I didn't this time, and I'm gonna blame it on me getting over my illness. But so with the video, you'll see it flip-flopping back and forth between each of us as we are talking, and I did get the platform fixed for next time, so it won't happen again. But I didn't want to take out what's going on, and having the episode available and the video available as well. So again, my apologies on not having the settings fixed for this go around, but it's gonna be great the next time. But like I said, we're going to talk about some of his projects. We're also going to talk about Cable, Love, and Chrome, which just came to an end this past week. And then after that, I'm going to come back and do my honorable mentions as well as my top 5 for the week. I'm not going to do a full review for each of them, simply because of the time David and I had in our conversation. So didn't want to have an overextended episode this week. But with that being said, here is my conversation with comic book writer David Pepose, talking about some of his upcoming projects as well as the ending to Cable, Love, and Chrome over at Marvel Comics. And I will see you all on the other side. Hey, this is Theo, and you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and make this guy a co-host, honorary co-host, because he's back with us again. Welcome, comic writer David Pepose, to the podcast. David, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to catch up. Excited to talk comics with you today.
Oh yeah, man. So we could talk probably for hours with all of the stuff that you are doing. You have been quite a busy fellow. How do you get time to get all of this stuff done?
Not much in the way of a personal life. No, I've been really fortunate that I've been working on a number of books lately. We just wrapped up Cable, Love, and Chrome this week as we're talking over at Marvel. Space Ghost is continuing on. We're doing a brand new relaunch coming out, I believe, in July. Space Ghost Season 2. Captain Planet and the Planeteers. I'm working on our 6th issue right now on that. Issue 2 is going to be coming out in the coming weeks, along with our Space Coast annual. And then Speed Racer, which is kicking off end of July. I just turned in issue 3 of that, and David Tinto actually just wrapped up his inks on issue 2. So yeah, it's been a fun year but certainly a busy one. I always say busy is a freelancer's favorite 4-letter word. Yeah, it is a challenge kind of keeping all the plates spinning and making sure that like you can keep a level of quality and a level of consistency without also like driving yourself insane. And so it has been kind of a learning curve for me in terms of just like, how do I pace myself? How do I not exhaust myself when I am feeling that degree of exhaustion? Can I build in a little bit of recovery time? And so, yeah, it's an ongoing process. And also, how do I find ways to just refine my process so it doesn't, so it requires less energy, but doesn't sacrifice any of the quality. So yeah, time management, having a really supportive wife, no social life really, so to speak. I don't usually take days off, but I've been kind of forcing myself on occasion to at least take recovery days. And regimenting my schedule, so like I can have more uninterrupted writing time. So yeah, it's all part of the process. And I think any creator who thinks that they have it all figured out, I don't know. I think there's always room to grow and refine your approach.
So let's talk cable. Let's kick
Yeah,
things off. And you kind of went in the order I wanted to go and follow. So let's kick things off
fantastic.
over at Marvel. We
Yeah.
just had Cable, Love, and Chrome that just came to an end just past Wednesday with issue number 5. We got it was basically a better to have loved and lost than not love at all. So was that the story from the get-go?
Well, the way that we put that story together, for those who haven't read Cable, Love, and Chrome, by the way, the quick log line, I pitched it as Edge of Tomorrow meets The Fault in Our Stars. And by that, I mean Cable, Marvel's time-traveling mutant. The thing that always stood out to me was not that he was a time traveler or a telepath or he had big guns. There's always another X-Man who has any one of those qualities. It was that he struggled with a techno-organic virus, which, I saw as like an allegory for cancer or HIV or ALS or any chronic condition, whether it's terminal or not, but something that just, there's no cure. This is how you live with it. And maybe it reduces your lifespan. And so our story followed Cable falling into a future timeline where the techno-organic virus actually is an ongoing concern. And so he falls in love with Avery Ryder, who's a freedom fighter who has the same condition that he has, but unlike him, has actually had a community to sort of help her process that. And so it's sort of this whirlwind doomed romance that winds up, Avery winds up succumbing to her condition. And so Cable winds up sort of breaking all the laws of time and space, trying to save her. And in so doing, accidentally turns her into this villain named Cicada, who's been hunting him across the entire series. And so it's kind of like an interesting, like sort of time loop kind of element that was somebody compared it to Looper in a recent review. And I was like, oh yeah, that's actually, I hadn't thought of that as an influence, but it was definitely an influence behind all that. And so the spoiler for anyone who hasn't read the finale is the way we kind of wrap the story up is that Cable winds up sort of undoing everything that sort of caused him to meet Avery in the first place, that caused him to inadvertently spread the techno-organic virus to Salvation Bay. It's sort of, he has undone this entire relationship, but he still remembers it. And I think for me, that was our way of sort of, making sure that like we're able to give somebody a happy ending. In this case, it's Avery, who no longer is infected with this life-altering condition, but at the cost of she doesn't know who Cable is. Their relationship has been undone, except in his own mind. And for me, I thought that was a way of giving Cable, like, it cements him as in a heroic status. He's had a lot of flaws throughout this series. He's been selfish. He's been unthinking. He's been, self-absorbed. And wanting to have his cake and eat it too, no matter kind of what the damage to the time stream. And this is sort of his way of like reasserting himself of like, do I care more about me or do I care about this woman, even if that means that like we can never be. And I thought that was like a really poignant way of sort of, he's learned something from this whole experience, but he does, even when he wins, he doesn't get to win. And I think that's like, if there's anything more Marvel than that, it's that. So yeah, that was an ending that my editor Tom Brevoort and we talked about that a lot. Because there was some discussion early on about like whether Cable himself might not remember any of this, and that there's just this itch in the back of his mind of something that's been left unfinished. And for me, we wound up going in a different direction with that. And I think for me, the rationale is like it hurts more when Cable knows. And also, I didn't want readers to feel like, oh, so this adventure there was no stakes behind it. Like even though it has been erased from the timeline, it still happened, and it still matters because it still matters to Cable.
Right. He remembers it.
And so I'm really happy with how we stuck the landing on that book, and I'm really thrilled. It's the best reviewed issue of the bunch. As of this moment, Cable is actually my best reviewed book of my career, which nobody's more surprised than me. But I think it goes to show, and this was Tom's idea, and I think Tom's instincts were right, is that like a time travel romance with Cable was certainly not on my bingo card. I certainly had my degree of skepticism when I first started talking about the project with him. And Tom was right. I think we were able to sort of have our cake and eat it too, that we can have Cable still have a story that's big and bombastic and has the time travel and the pyrotechnics, but that we can kind of peel back some of the layers a little bit and dig into who he is as a character, his metaphor in terms of, I think, representing people with chronic conditions. I think, that we can sort of give him some personal stakes, even a little bit of vulnerability, even leaning into his own flaws as a character, and still have a story that fits all that. I took a lot of influence, from Claremont and Miller's Wolverine miniseries, of just like it. There are, big scale stakes, whether it's about Salvation Bay, whether it's about, the timeline as a whole, but ultimately this is a very intimate, personal story where the true stakes are all personal. And, I think for a character that's as big and bold and larger than life and stoic as Cable, that's like a refreshing change of pace, I think. And so I'm really excited and grateful that people seem to have really understood what we were going for with this series.
So you mentioned a couple of things that leads me into my next question.
True.
Are you of the belief, and you were right, for Cable, it was, he won, but he really didn't win. It was almost like you won the battle, lost the war type of situation. You saved Avery, you saved Salvation Bay. You remember all this, but the love you had for her is gone, because she's gone. She's back to where she was. Are you someone who's of the opinion that characters like Cable or Peter Parker can't really have a true happy ending? So Peter can't really go off into the sunset with Mary Jane, or Cable and Avery can't really get together and stay together.
So that, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but no, actually that I don't agree with. I do think that there is room for a happy ending. I mean, you saw it in Savage Avengers, where like the whole goal between our love triangle with Cloak and Dagger and Anti-Venom, Flash Thompson, was we wanted to put some barriers up there so that when Cloak and Dagger finally get together, when they finally are a romantic pairing, because they've been teasing it for 40 years, 30 or 40 years, that it was earned, that we're like, okay, we got ourselves to this place. So no, I'm certainly a believer in happy endings, but I think it's a case by case basis. And I think in terms of this story in particular, it was writing for the runway in a lot of ways. I knew that this was going to be a self-contained story, that this was going to be 5 issues, that this was pitched to me as a mini series. And so I, that challenge wound up becoming sort of a foundational pillar for the whole series, which was, I know Cable's had other love interests: Domino, Esme Cuckoo, Jen Scott, the Hope Summers' namesake. most of whom have had longer runways than a 5-issue mini. And so it became the question of, how do we make this a convincing romance? How do we sell this romance in the span of 5 issues? And that became Avery. She's a short timer, in terms of like her life expectancy, and also knowing just realistically that, introducing new characters, in my mind, the biggest challenge of introducing new characters, particularly in a miniseries, it's one thing if it's a villain, because, a villain you can kind of bring back, somebody else might say, oh, hey, that's a cool villain, and bring them back down the line. Even if it's a new spin-off character like Joe Garrison, our new Punisher, even that, it's like, okay, he can pop up in Daredevil Woman Without Fear, or maybe he can pop up in Ben Percy's upcoming run down the line. A supporting love interest like Avery Ryder, I knew that's a tougher sell, because if you can't bank on that character ever coming back. It's just, every writer's got their own thing that they want to do. And I completely understand, like, nobody would expect me to, pick up a series and, to start writing a series and be like, well, you have to include this supporting cast person that the previous writer did. Nothing would ever get done. And so the structure of it, and the structure of this whole story, that it was built on the romance, but it was sort of a doomed romance because of the techno-organic virus. The story kind of lended itself to, like, this is going to be sort of a tragic, bittersweet ending, that, like, Cable saves the day, he saves the girl, but he can't, it's at a cost, a personal cost. But I don't think, like, Speed Racer, for example, jumping ahead a little bit, like, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, like, even though we have a will they or won't they with Speed and Trixie, like,
Right.
they're obviously going to end up together, So I think, I like it when these, I like it when characters have, like, long-standing supportive partnerships. I understand structurally why it can be a challenge, and I can understand the argument of how it might age a character up, but, like, it's not impossible, obviously. You see Ultimate Spider-Man, for example.
Right.
And I grew up, with Peter Parker and Mary Jane. I thought J. Michael Straczynski's, that whole will they or won't they was, like, I think the spine of the whole run, emotionally speaking, to me. So yeah, I think, of course there's always going to be questions of, like, especially, I think Tom Brevoort mentioned it in his newsletter, of, like, they already had to do a lot of work to break that marriage up. And so, like, why would you sort of, like, jump back into that hole that you've spent all this time sort of digging yourself out of? So I understand, like, internally why they wouldn't want to go back into a marriage, just given the Herculean efforts they took to get out of it. So yeah, I think it is on a case by case. I mean, I totally understand for a big name character, Batman, great example, of, like, okay, if he got married, that does change the dynamic of that in a way. Although you could make the argument that giving him, like, a biological son could have done the same thing. So, I think it's all about, ultimately, like, what's the story you can tell, like, I'm not a purist just for the sake of being a purist. I want to make that very, very clear. And knowing, as a creator, knowing you only have, 20 pages an issue to fit in the soap opera as well as the mythology and the action, I totally understand why, like, being like, oh, okay, well, I got to burn, 10 to 20 to 25% of my issue on checking in with a wife, like, I get why that can be challenging, especially because we're not writing 22-page issues anymore at the big two. So, yeah, but I'm certainly not against it. I think it's just, making sure that you're telling the right story with it.
It sounds like you think that it makes the story more finite. It really limits how much more of a story that you could possibly tell, unless there's some type of event.
It's not even that. It's just, every time you write a comics issue, it's ultimately about real estate. It's just how much space you have to tell your story. I saw, there was one person who said something about one of my books, who was like, oh, well, they could have told this in one issue. And I'm like, hey, how? Listen, if you can tell this story in one issue, please share your knowledge with me, because like, it's literally, I'm working on an issue of Captain Planet right now where I am pulling teeth to, like, I always say, my wife always says it's going to be my gravestone, my kingdom for one more page, like it is, I think the number one challenge of writing a comic is that you have a finite runway to do it. So I don't think it's necessarily, it's literally, it's just about how much space you have. That like there's always a trade-off. And I think so. I understand when you don't have a marriage, and again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm like campaigning against like characters getting married. I certainly do not feel that way. I grew up, I think Superman and Lois is like super cool. And then again, I grew up as a Spider-Man Mary Jane head. But I'm just saying from like just the nuts and bolts, the process of it all. I will say, like, having a marriage, you need to check in on that character more often. You do need to check in on that character, probably every issue, every other issue. So that's pages that you have to burn that you could be using doing literally anything else. Whereas like, I do think like the current status quo with Spider-Man, he's dating Shaxs, I think, Flash Thompson's ex. Like you don't need to check
from the other world, the other universe.
You're able to have your cake and eat it too. I'm using that phrase a lot today. But in that way that you can have that romantic soap opera subplot, but you can sort of check in on that a little bit more at your own pace. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm agnostic, we'll just say, like I don't see it as, it can be a value add if you have like some good stories to tell with it, and you have a good dynamic between those characters. Like I think like Hal Jordan and Carol Ferris is like one of my favorites in that.
Right.
But I think the will they or won't they adds a certain charge to it, that they're not married, but you're like, they could be, or they could break up. We're kind of drawing on that a lot with Speed Racer. So yeah, I mean, ultimately I think it's, you want to have a romantic angle to it for sure. I think that's a tool. It adds a layer of emotionality that you wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah, I think it's just one more tool in the toolbox, and how far you want to commit is really, it's ultimately up to you and your editors.
So let's move on over to Dynamite. You've mentioned the titles that you're working on over there. So I'm going to jump into my Wayback Machine. And I remember the first time I had you on this show, I did my pre-intro, basically calling out the folks at Dynamite saying, hey, I need you guys to listen in. And once you finish listening, I need you to give Space Ghost like 12 more ongoing status. And we've gotten the news now. We now get a season 2 of Space Ghost. So before we talk about season 2, let's talk about how we're coming to the end of season 1. So issue 12 is out. We've seen that the Council of Doom has been defeated, but we still got one more issue, and I'm assuming the annual is going to finish up this story.
Yes.
Did Dax win, or did we really get a story of more of the villains just didn't trust themselves enough to where they could win themselves?
Well, it was one of those, and it's funny. I actually drew a lot of inspiration from Mark Evanier and Steve Rude's Comico one shot for Space Ghost for that. And they actually took a very similar approach in that, like, you're never going to beat the Council of Doom one-on-one. The way that you beat the Council of Doom, and spoilers for anyone who hasn't read Space Ghost issue 12 yet, but you should pick it up wherever comics are sold.
Pick it up.
Is that, like, at the end of the day, they're not really as much of a team in the way that Space Ghost and Jan and Jace are. They're bonded. They're a family. These guys are more of like ruthless individualists that happen to be like overlapping in a certain anti-Space Ghost agenda. But like they're not used to, they're all very alpha personalities. You know, they're all kind of, and they're ruthless. You know, they're bad guys. Like, you can't trust these people. And so, you know, they're all working in unison at this very moment. But it's Jace who's sort of like, you know, he's our trickster character, you know, out of all of them. He's the one who kind of clocks onto, like, it doesn't take much to like remind these bad guys that they're bad guys and that they're used to being in charge. And you obviously, when you have 6 strong personalities in one room together, you know, not everybody can be in charge. So it was kind of fun figuring out ways to be like, oh, hey, like, you know, it looks bad when they're all together, but like reminding everybody what their core personality traits are and how they are not going to be simpatico with one another. You know, somebody like Zorak, for example, is a zealot, you know, and he's, granted, he's a zealot whose faith has been severely tested. But at the same time, it's like, you know, he fought God and survived, you know, like that's certainly, you know, he certainly feels a certain sense of purpose. Whereas like Brack is the opposite. Brack is like, I'm doing this for money. And if I don't get paid, if I don't get a reward for this, I'm out. And so, you know, that like those two, when you frame it like that, those two are incompatible.
And you kind of get that from the beginning of the issue where he's like, all right, we done. Let's get on out of here. And everyone else like, no, I need to find, I want, if we don't see a body, he's not dead. I want him dead, you know, and
Zorak in particular,
you know, he's saying like, exactly that.
Yeah, he's very much like, oh, like we're, you know, like we're in this until the end or until this planet blows up, you know, like, yeah, you know, I thought, and it's funny because I think we're going to see a different angle to all of this in the annual, especially with Ultima sort of now, like having finally revealed itself from the shadows. You know, we have sort of, we see the Council of Doom united against Space Ghost because his team is fractured. And then the team comes back together and we see the Council of Doom fracture. And now we're going to kind of see what happens when the Council of Doom is sort of all put under one singular entity. And now Team Space Ghost is sort of, they're on their own and they're going to have to like figure out how do we beat this unified force. And there are pros and cons to that approach as well, which we're going to see in the annual. So yeah, Council of Doom has been a really fun cast to play with. And I'm excited for people to see what else we've got planned with season 2. Suffice to say, while we're going to be wrapping up RoboCorps' overarching storyline, and we're going to be wrapping up the Council of Doom sort of meta arc that we've been building together, we're still maintaining, I think, what I consider our core formula for Space Ghost in season 2, which is it's the villain of the week, but it's also the interpersonal dynamics with Space Ghost and Jan and Jace and sort of that ongoing dynamic in their relationship. And suffice to say, we're going to be throwing a pair of grenades into the room in the annual that are going to really inform our overarching storyline in season 2 on both of those ways.
So I'm going to jump in my question on that, since you kind of mentioned the maturing and this dynamic between Space Ghost, Jan, and Jace. Without spoiling, should we expect to see the same level of weight or involvement with those 3 characters? Or as we found in issues 10, 11, and 12, you know, Jan is now thinking, I want to go and learn more, you know, because but all this time we've been with you. So does this mean perhaps in season 2 we may be seeing more individual stories with Dax, or will they still be hanging about?
Oh no, I mean, Jan and Jace are core parts of this book. They are not going anywhere. If I have one rule about Space Ghost, it's this is an ensemble book. You cannot tell a Space Ghost story without Jan and Jace in it. It's like trying to do like a banana split without the banana. It like just doesn't work. You know, it's a core part of the it's a core ingredient to me. And you know, you see it from the original cartoons. You meet Jan and Jace in the first episode of Space Ghost before you meet Space Ghost himself. Like, you know, they are in it every episode. So you know, but it's funny, Jan's application to the Space Academy is going to have some further reaching repercussions. You'll see it in the annual, and then we will confirm in issue 1 of season 2 that that was tied to Jan's application. We'll just say it puts the twins on some unexpected radars. Because everybody thought that they were dead. They thought that they died on Space Colony Omicron with the rest of their family. So there's going to be some interested parties now when they realize that Jan and Jace Kepler are still alive. So that'll be fun. But yes, and I will say there's some other seeds that we've been kind of planting in earlier issues that you'll see in the annual will start to pay off. And then that will sort of, I think, be like kind of the narrative spine that season 2 hinges on.
Okay, so let me ask this question. If you can't answer, I totally understand. Is the ending of season 1 how you originally planned it? Or did you make some slight changes knowing season 2 was now coming aboard?
I did make some changes. Well, it was one of those things. When I originally was approached to write Space Coast, I was asked 12 issues in an annual. What can you do with that? And so for me, it was building like a big Council of Doom storyline and having RoboCorps sort of serving as the spine underneath everything else. It was around when I started writing this Council of Doom 3-parter that my editor, Joe Rybant, said, hey, listen, we've really been enjoying Space Coast. It's been selling well for us. We would like to do more. Do you have ideas? And so we originally talked about doing just like another 5 issues, but I gave them sort of a longer runway of just like, here's what I could do with like 10 to 12 or 7 to 12, I think is what I originally told them. And I think we're probably landing somewhere on the 10 to 12 range now, where I was like, we could do kind of like a bigger, broader thing with some kind of emotional stakes behind all of it. And so that's what we've been building up to. So I did change our annual. I changed the ending for it because originally that was going to be the end of the series. And we were going to wrap things up in, I think, a little bit more of a final way. But knowing that like, oh, hey, like if anything, this is sort of like the halfway point now, or, now that we're sort of breaking it up as a new number 1, this is the end of season 1. And now we are going to go to season 2. So, adding in those grenades, that I mentioned, but I will say that there's a little bit of a tip off in an earlier issue that eagle-eyed fans will see the moment that they read the annual. And that's where I wrote that being like, I don't know if we're going to get to do more, but if we get to do more, this would be like a fun little Easter egg to throw in there to sort of, give ourselves that opportunity. And I'm really glad that I did that because I almost didn't. It was sort of a line that I wrote. It was around the holidays last year that I was like, I don't know, maybe this will turn into something. And it wound up turning into a big thing. Because without spoiling too much, the big challenge for Space Coast season 2 was that how do you find a bigger threat ultimately to build up to than the Council of Doom? They're Space Coast's arch enemies. And Ultima is sort of the big bad behind the scenes. How do you find somebody that's bigger than that? How do you make the stakes bigger than that? And there's really only a couple of villains in the Space Ghost mythology that you can build up to that feel that way. And you'll get to meet them in the annual. And then season 2 will sort of be building up to that inevitable confrontation.
Okay. So the title of the annual is going to be The Ultima Supremacy, and it comes out in a few weeks. I thought it was going to be next week, but it's actually
the diamond of it all.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's sort of made release dates a bit of a moving
it's made
target.
hell for all of the indies, and it's a shame, really.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I don't really know all the whys and wherefores, but I'm sure it's for a reason. And so I'm hoping it'll come out in a week or two. Just stay tuned. Ask your local comic shop. Just have them keep you informed. But as soon as I know a new release date for those books, I will be shouting them from the rooftops.
Yes, and when he shouts it, I get it, and I'll be shouting too, because again, I've been following this from the start and absolutely have loved everything with Space Ghost. So let's leave Space Ghost and let's stay at Dynamite.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Captain Planet. And I cannot go any further as someone who watched this cartoon for its entirety growing up in high school without asking, what's up with the beard? Where did the beard come from?
I've been pitching Captain Planet for a decade. I've literally, as long as I've been in the comics industry, I have pitched Captain Planet to every publisher, literally every publisher. I've had publishers laugh at me for pitching them Captain Planet. So when Dynamite announced that they had picked up the rights at San Diego Comic-Con last year, I marched over to Nick Barucci and Joe Rybandt and said, if you don't have somebody in this book, it needs to be me. So when I started working with Amon Casalos on Captain Planet, the first thing that I said was, I want to make sure it feels modern. The original cartoon was meant to be the world outside your window, but it was targeted towards younger kids. And it was also firmly rooted in the year 1990. So Captain Planet, he had his mullet, he had his crop top. Those were very in 1990. Things have changed dramatically in the intervening 35 years. And so now I think that's a reason why a lot of people turn their nose up at Captain Planet. Is they think of it as dated. They think of it as very much a product of its time. And for me, I see it as, well, it's meant to be the world outside your window. It was meant to be relevant. And so for me, that's the reason why I wanted to modernize the concept and just say, okay, like the world has changed in 35 years. What would Captain Planet look like if it debuted today? Which I think is kind of like the overarching ethos of like how I approach all of these nostalgia books. And so, for me, the first thing that I said was, I want to give the Planeteers, sort of a modern redesign, because they don't have like coordinated costumes in this. They're just ordinary people like you and me, so I wanted to make sure they look like people that you'd see, on the street. And so, but Captain Planet himself, I was like, I really want to give him an update, something that feels like timeless and isn't necessarily rooted to any one particular time period, but also speaks to who he is, both as a character, but also as sort of this elemental figure, that he's not made out of flesh and blood, but out of rocks and stone and ice and flame. And so Amon drew a couple of designs, just a couple first passes at it. And one of them had the beard. I did not ask for the beard, but when I saw it, I was like, oh, that's a cool idea. Like that really, like, I think speaks to Cap as like, as a father figure, in a lot of ways. He's this paternal, mentorly reassuring figure. He's I know there was a lot of concern when we announced the book that, are we doing grim and gritty Captain Planet? And I think that's antithetical to the core concept. I think Captain Planet is a concept that's intrinsically rooted in hope and optimism and caring for your fellow man. And I think Captain Planet is somebody who ultimately at his core, the whole reason why he fights to save the environment, why he fights to preserve our planet, is that he doesn't want to see anybody die. And so the beard felt like a fun way to sort of like plant our flag design wise, but also to really kind of sell what Captain Planet's dynamic is vis-a-vis the rest of the Planeteers, which is, he's not a genie you can just summon to wish away your problems. There are very strict limitations on how and when you can use Captain Planet, but he's always in your corner. He's always sort of the one who's like trying to encourage the Planeteers when he's not, physically corporeal. And so, yeah, I think the beard actually wound up being like a really, I can't imagine Captain Planet now without the beard. And maybe that's because I've been writing him for the last, 8 months. But yeah, he just, he's Earth's dad, and I'm here for it.
All right. Well, thank you, Iman Casellos, for that, and for that one little sketch that got you and flipped that switch in your head.
Yep.
All right. So in issue one is out on shelves already. If you haven't picked it up already, we know that Guy is there. We know Captain Planet is there, but in today's time, he's not there yet because the Planeteers are still growing.
Yeah.
So are you going, and I don't want to use this in a negative way. Are you going to string us along a little
Oh,
bit
no.
to try to help us learn a little bit more about the Planeteers, or is it going to be more of a quick turnaround because we know Guy is in trouble in New York?
Yes. I wanted to make sure that like our quick snapshots of the Planeteers in issue 1 like really kind of painted a picture of like who they are, what their context is, where they're from. Is there any particular sort of character traits to them that we can kind of use to leverage. But issue 2, we're going to learn a lot about the Planeteers by the way that they interact with one another. Issue 2 has the 5 Planeteers converging on New York and using their own various means of conveyance. Seeing those first meetings, it's one of my favorite issues I've ever written. Those initial meetings, some of them are going to be a little bit more confrontational than others, let's just say. But that's for me the appeal of Captain Planet, is that like watching these characters like play off each other. They're very strong personalities, and I think that's a gift. It reminds me a lot of Giant Size X-Men, honestly.
Okay.
In that, when you meet Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler and Colossus and Thunderbird and Sunfire and Banshee, they're all very strong personalities, and that's like Cyclops' core conflict in that issue is just like, how do I get these like core these strong personalities to like work together? And that's what I love about Captain Planet, is that these characters have such strong contexts and backstories and where they come from that that's part of I think the thrill of the concept for me, is that it is something that's meant to instill empathy, that we are stronger together than we are apart, and that we have more in common than we are different. But that's not to discount the fact that, like, when you meet somebody who's really different for the first time, there is a degree of culture shock. There is a degree of discomfort. There is a degree of interrogation and confrontation. And ultimately, you just hope that your better angels win out. That you like are like, listen, like where can we find common ground, and how can we respect our differences and celebrate each other's differences? But it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen instantaneously for a lot of people. And that's certainly going to be the case for the Planeteers. Is it's going to take a little bit for them to like kind of like fall in as a unit. In issue 2, that's kind of, we see a lot of that in issue 2, and we do see that I think through this entire origin story. So yes, but it's one of those things. Issue 1 was meant to be a table setting issue, knowing, again, like what we were talking about earlier, knowing that I had 22 pages to introduce 5 Planeteers, Gaia, Captain Planet, and our villain, Lucian Plunder, and his mercenary henchman Argos Bleak. That's a lot of real estate. That's a lot of ground to cover in 22 pages. I'm really proud of how we managed to fit all that together and introducing 5 Planeteers in 12 pages. But now I'm not going to waste any time bringing them together. You will see that is the heart of issue 2. I want to bring this team together as fast as I can, because watching them play off each other, I think is one of the main draws of the whole series.
Okay. So has there been any pushback on any of the elements you want in the story? Because again, the cartoon was in many ways political in nature, and I'm assuming because of the environment with regards to the climate and planet. But has there been any pushback on what you may have wanted to tell in the story that?
No. Honestly, Warner Brothers, talking internally, Warner Brothers and Dynamite they've given me a ton of latitude, and Amon a ton of latitude. Like, we are doing exactly what we want to do on this book. I think I've gotten one note on the series to date, and I can share what it is because we've already shown those preview pages. It was issue 2. Our licensor was like, "Hey, could we add in a little more mythology for Captain Planet?" So it's out there. We have like a little montage of Captain Planet through the ages, sort of showing like, oh, he's been around for millennia. And he's seen the eruption of Pompeii. He's saving Chinese fishermen, in the 1400s. He's stopping British poachers in Kenya in the early 1900s. All stuff that before, was before smartphones and before, journalism was really like paying attention to a lot of this stuff. That was the only note that they gave me, and it was obviously a note for the best. I thought it was, Megan Logan over there. It was a great note. So definitely no pushback internally. And honestly, as far as like the response to it, it's better response than I could have ever hoped for. I think everybody seems to understand the vision behind the book. I think they are realizing, we announced Captain Planet the day after the inauguration. And I think, people are realizing now that like this is a book that can be modernized. This is and with this diverse international team of people who coming from all different walks of life who are trying to stop a corrupt billionaire from like destroying the planet, that feels real timely in the year 2025. That's something that like people really can get behind. And so yeah, the response has been incredible. Of course, there's like going to be like one or two bad actors out there who like, they're not mad at my Captain Planet book. They're mad at that Captain Planet exists. Right. Like I don't care. Like there's going to be some people who that's how they make their living is by, trying to turn everything into culture war nonsense. But for me, I feel like this book, not to pat myself on the back, not to toot my own horn, I feel like anybody who finds a flaw in it, it's just them clutching their pearls. It's just them being dramatic. I feel like we come by our diversity honestly in this book. And I think it is something that has been baked into the core concept of Captain Planet from the very first episode. Anybody who says, oh, has Captain Planet gotten a woke makeover, which I did see that headline and I laughed. I thought that was hilarious. Either your media literacy skills are terrible or you weren't paying attention, because that's been baked into it. So no, I think, I've been so thrilled by the response to this book. I couldn't be happier with it. So yeah, no pushback, really of any kind to note. People seem to be really behind it, which is wonderful to see.
Okay, so we're gonna push back away from Dynamite, and we're gonna now head on over to Mad Cave, and I want to always be respectful of your time. But This is everything that I've been reading by you. This is the title that I am most excited about.
Absolutely.
Speed Racer #1. So we already have the free comic book day issue out. The free, Speed Racer 0, more or less. I reviewed it on the recent episode of the podcast. We got issue #1 is slated for a July 30th release.
Yes.
And so you and I never had a chance to really talk about it. We hinted at it the last time we were together, but all the details weren't out.
Yeah.
How did that story come together? How did you and Mad Cave come together? And of course, there's this partnership that Mad Cave has with Tatsunoko, with getting a lot of their properties, their IPs together. How did y'all meet up on this?
So prepare yourself for a little bit of a zigzag story. Mad Cave has been very supportive of my work from the beginning of my career. Mark London and Chris Fernandez have been fans since my Spencer and Locke days. So they've just been real champions of my work for a long time. And so around when I started at Marvel, they approached me to do a creator-owned series called The Devil That Wears My Face. And that was a really fun experience working. I had worked with editor-in-chief Mike Martz and Christina Harrington back at Aftershock. And I've actually known Mike since I was in college. He was my intern supervisor at DC back when he was the Batman editor. So I love Mad Cave. I love working with them. They're a great team, very supportive of their talent. And they really do go the extra mile. And so after Devil wrapped up, I was talking with editor Chaz Pangburn about doing like potential licensed work. And we talked about a few possible properties, but either the timing didn't work out, in terms of my schedule, or I didn't know the property very well and I didn't feel like I had anything compelling to say about it, and didn't have the time to do the homework to watch all the episodes. But Chaz pulled me aside at a Mad Cave signing at San Diego last year and said, listen, we've been doing these books with Tatsunoko for Gotcha Man, and it's been really successful for us. And so we want people, so we're going to be expanding that license, and we're going to be picking up Speed Racer. Would you have any interest in writing Speed Racer? And like, no pun intended, but like the wheels immediately started turning. Immediately, as soon as the sentence left his mouth, I was just like, oh, you could tell something really cool with this. I mean, I'd been writing Space Ghost, and that had been going really well. And I was like, you could certainly take that similar approach to a number of different properties. Speed Racer, to me, it's Rocky in a race car. It's seeing Speed's heroic journey of going from like winning these illegal back alley street races to joining the official Formula X circuit, and then his path to becoming a champion. And for me, that was the thing that really appealed to me, was a couple of things. First off, I love writing car chases. I've done it since my very first books. Spencer and Locke, George Santiago Jr. did an amazing car chase in our second issue, which we did a repeat of in our second volume. Devil Wears My Face, I had a carriage chase. Even Moon Knight City of the Dead, we had like an aerial dogfight with the Scarlet Scarab. I love being able to convey speed and motion and intensity in a static medium like comics. I think it's a very interesting challenge. And some of the all-timer artists, Tradmore on Ghost Rider, David Aja on Hawkeye, George Santiago Jr., Spencer and Locke. David Tinto is the next one. He does these car chases amazingly well in Speed Racer. He is just killing this book left, right, and center. So that was a huge draw for me. I was like, oh, being told that I had a 15-issue runway to do a car chase in every issue. And it wound up being 16 issues because we had it in our free comic book day issue. I was like, I'm never going to get that opportunity again. Just never. That sounds like an opportunity too cool to pass up. But there's also something about Speed Racer as a character that's very compelling to me and really resonates with me personally, in that he is someone, not to sound too like hoity-toity with it, Speed is kind of like a Hamlet figure to me. He's got this deep well of emotions. He broods. He's got these big kind of like, his highs are high, but his lows are real low. He's somebody who's a creature of passion. His whole character trajectory is that he's chasing his dream, his passion of being a Formula X racer. And for me, as a comics creator, that's something I can really resonate with. I live and breathe and sleep comics. I have for as long as I can remember. But this taking that fandom and then saying, I'm going to make my own, and then going through the indie trenches, and then suddenly finding myself in this much bigger spotlight, and sort of saying, okay, like if I'm going to make this my career, how am I going to hack this? How am I going to step up my game in order to really seize the dream? That is Speed's trajectory for me. And the things that we've been able to add to it are not just personal stakes. This, without spoiling too much, you will find out in issue 1 and then definitely in issue 2, there's a reason why Speed joins the Formula X League. There's a reason why there's no room for second place for him. He's not just doing this for himself. He's not just chasing glory. There are some bigger stakes in mind. But also, it's the soap opera of it all. It's this supporting cast, and seeing how they are reflections of that same passion, but they're reflected almost like a prism in different types of flavors and light. There's Trixie, who we're going to meet in issue 1. We're going to see their first meeting. She's the Carol Ferris to Speed's Hal Jordan, in that she has inherited her father's racing team. That's her way of keeping her family's legacy alive. So that's what racing is to her. And so there's this will they or won't they, because Speed represents the freedom that's inherent of driving. That, that there's something that when you're on the open road with somebody you love, the rest of the world can't touch you. So there's that sort of, but she's also his boss, and he's the hot dog racer who joins her team because there's nowhere else he can join. And so there's that fun dynamic that we're playing a lot with in this series. There's Pops, his dad, who, he's this legendary designer, and so that's the way he sees racing. But also, he's got this. He's so conflicted and torn about the sport of Formula X because it took his son from him, Rex Racer, who suffers a fatal crash that has basically torn their family apart. And so Pops is vehemently against Speed being a racer because he doesn't want history to repeat itself. He doesn't want to lose another kid to this. But eventually he finds out that Speed's doing this and there's no turning back. So he's like, the only way I can keep my kid safe is if I train him. And so he becomes Speed's like ultimate corner man and coach, trying to instill lessons that Speed, while he's a natural prodigy at this, he doesn't have the refinement yet. And so he needs somebody to teach him that. You have Spritle, who's sort of it's Speed's kid brother. And we sort of reimagined him as like a fast-talking, streetwise hustler of a younger brother. He's been forced to kind of grow up a little faster in the aftermath of losing of their family losing Rex. And so for him, he's also, he's like, I need to bring money home, and so he's been live streaming Speed's races and sort of, he hustles everybody on the side to get them to bet big because, he eggs them on so they can take more money home. But he's got a future in color commentary.
I was really surprised when reading the Free Comic Book Day issue that Spritle, he was always a trickster.
Yeah.
In the cartoon, but now he's more than that. He's an influencer. He's popular.
I thought that was like a fun way of modernizing the character because I think out of all the elements of Speed Racer, he's probably the one that is the most of its time. That probably wouldn't have aged as well if we had done like a 1-for-1 representation. So I thought, like just making him like an active part of this and sort of, he's checking out his brother's races. Like I thought that was interesting and cool. And then lastly,
you cannot talk Spritle without talking Chim Chim. That's
Chim Chim. Yeah, Chim Chim was a last minute addition to the book. We talked extensively about whether or not we were going to use Chim Chim, and it's funny because I consider myself comics' leading monkey laureate at this point. Between Blip in Space Ghost and Suchi in Captain Planet and Chim Chim in Speed Racer and the Winged Monkeys in the OZ. I write a surprising amount of monkeys in my career.
You need to pitch a Detective Chimp story.
I do need to do a detective. You're right. That's the Chipfinity stone that I'm missing. But it was one of those things. As we talked about it, I was kind of like, Chim Chim is one of those elements that like, he's such a specific choice that like not having him in there would feel wrong. And so, and it kind of gives like Spritle, like just like, somebody else to talk to if need be. And I love this idea. I don't know if we're ever going to get to it. Or maybe somebody will tell it in the Tales from the Road anthology series. I would love to, I have like a bit of an idea of how did Spritle and Chim Chim wind up like eating each other. And the story, in my mind is like, it was clearly some sort of bet gone awry that, like Spritle wound up like getting a monkey in terms of payment in lieu of cash. But they're just like, it's a fun pair, having the two of them. And Spritle sort of has used Chim Chim as like his branding symbol a little bit. So it was fun, like a fun little cherry on top. For me, the character that really stands out the most, sporting wise, it's Racer X, and the idea that he sees racing as a way of settling old scores, that like Mark Russell is doing a spin-off series with Racer X following his sort of adventures outside of our main story. And but the idea that like he's sort of like he's not necessarily a champion racer at this point. He is the world's greatest getaway driver, but also he's sort of like he's like a hockey enforcer. in a lot of ways, is the way that I see him. That he's not necessarily the guy who's going to win first place, although he's got the skills to do so. He's the guy who's like, he's trying to root out the criminal elements within Formula X that are the reason that he basically lost his life and his family. And he's looking to basically get his revenge. He's looking to take them out before they can get their ill-gotten wins on the track. So he's trying to set things right on the track by wrecking other people. And I think that's like a really interesting dynamic, is that when he and Speed wind up working in tandem, it's sort of like, it is a little Paul Walker and Vin Diesel, but it's also just like, he knows Speed has what it takes to be a champion. And he's going to sort of give him whatever edge he can. He's going to run interference as best he can to try to help Speed reach his potential and survive long enough to reach the championship. But, he's fun. He's like Batman meets Dominic Toretto, he's this sort of man of mystery. And, as the series progresses, like, we kind of get a sense of like, why does he care about Speed? And what's he trying to do here? And Speed kind of figuring out, oh, there's a connection here, between us. So, and I know Mark is doing some incredible work over in his miniseries, with Racer X. So yeah, it's like, it's a fun cast. And I think for me, having written superheroes for the last few years, I love writing superheroes. However, I think a challenge to writing superheroes for an extended period is that when you've got the powers, when you've got the costumes, when you've got the mythology, when you've got the world-shaking stakes, and goes back to something that you and I were talking about earlier in the conversation, it doesn't leave a lot of real estate for the human element of it all. It's very easy to forget how to write a normal human being when all you're writing are capes and tights. And that's something that Tom Brevoort really instills in me a lot, is like, a superhero is only as heroic if he's actually saving other people. If they're saving bystanders, or they're saving civilians. Having human supporting characters is very important for a superhero mythology, because otherwise it becomes very self-referential and dynastic, and it just becomes superheroes dealing with superhero problems. Anyway, that's a long way of saying Speed Racer doesn't have any of that. Speed, there's no code names. There's the occasional costume change in that, like, Speed has a racing suit, and Speed has like a couple of like, outfits that we alternate between. But, he has no powers. The closest thing he has is the Mach 5. And so that means the soap opera element is really elevated, I think, in this series, is that we have, what happens on the tracks, but then there's also the soap opera that happens off of it. And so for me, it's been a really refreshing mental palate cleanser, where it's forced me to really kind of go back to the fundamentals. It's very dialogue driven. It's figuring out what's the emotional beats behind all that, because you can't hide it under spectacle. You can't hide it under like a clever use of powers. These are human characters, and the stakes are very human. They're very personal. And so it's been a great way for me to kind of go back to my roots. Spencer and Locke, that was all very street level. Even that had like a degree of superpowers with, Detective Locke imagining his partner Spencer. But yeah, I think Speed Racer has such an incredible supporting cast. I think the best supporting cast I've ever had the opportunity to write, in fact. And they've all got such strong personalities that it's been really fun to get to watch Speed play off of each of them.
So how is it working with the folks at Tatsunoko? Again, you were working with some. You're working with IPs, but not at the same level as you would be on one of the big two at Marvel or DC. So how is that relationship with regards to sticking with canon? Because I would assume that they want to keep things within the lore of Mako Go, and while still allowing you some room to breathe with the characters as well.
Yeah. Well, we're taking a similar approach to Space Ghost, and in that, it's a reboot, brand new continuity. So you don't have to watch the cartoon in order to appreciate what we're doing. But I watched every episode. I did my homework. I took detailed notes on every episode because I wanted to draw from the mythology and just figuring out cool ways to like modernize it and stuff like that. And so I think that approach really worked for Tatsunoko, knowing that I was like, okay, like I'm being respectful of the lore. Like I see different ways that I can connect point A to point B, because that's the advantage that I have that the original cartoon didn't, which is I'm able to look at the whole thing in hindsight, and I'm able to sort of make some connections or figure out like, hey, like, are there elements that I can either combine from multiple episodes or split across from different episodes, and sort of build like a fun constellation of stories for Speed to follow. But Tatsunoko, we're about a quarter of the way through my run, and knock on wood, so far they've been really great. Like I think that they've been pretty limited as far as notes are concerned. I think, there's always, of course, the sense of making sure that it can appeal not just to an American audience, but also making sure that it can appeal to a Japanese audience. I think that's something that's certainly on their minds, and I think we've been pretty simpatico as far as that's concerned. I think they've been great to work with, and Chaz Pangburn, our editor, really kind of has served as the go-between. And so that way, like, any sort of discussion that might be had, a lot of that is just sort of like just connecting the dots A to B in terms of like cultural stuff. And Chaz has been a real expert in that and figuring out like, how do we sort of navigate any of that to make sure there's no miscommunication, while still like preserving the integrity of the story. I think it's also really helped. I'm very intense with my outlines. I write every issue out, and then I do a beat sheet page to page to make sure the whole thing fits. And so Tatsunoko knew exactly what they were getting into when they approved my outline for that, and we haven't really deviated thus far in any material way. So yeah, it's I think knowing from the jump where we're headed with it, and they could see like, oh, here's the mythology that he's drawing from. So like you'll see like Kim Jugger, you'll see the car acrobatic team, you'll see Captain Terror, you'll see like the GRX engine, the Great Mammoth car, just to name like a few, the Melange, like that's all in the greater outline. So I think they were thrilled to see like, oh, okay, like he's not coming out of this like not having done his homework, like he's watched every episode, he knows, like we recognize what he's drawing from. And I think that really, if I have any good qualities as a writer, I think it's that I am willing to do the homework. I am willing to watch 50 episodes of Speed Racer and, burn 2 or 3 weeks to do it just so I know the mythology that I'm drawing from. And I think that has served me really well working on licensed books, because that way, like new fans, like I can figure out how do I convey this in a way that is understandable to somebody who's never watched an episode of Speed Racer. But if you're a fan of Speed Racer, you're like, oh, I know this character. I know what they're doing here. And people seem to really appreciate. I think the biggest surprise I've had writing these nostalgia books is how forgiving the audience has been. I think I was expecting everyone to be more of a purist, because I do think that's a quality that we're seeing a lot of in Big Two readers, is that they've got a very traditional way of seeing things, and they want it to read in a way that it felt like when they were kids. And so it can be kind of difficult to introduce brand new things, I think for these nostalgia books that have laid fallow for a while, people are a lot more understanding that like, hey, we're going to modernize this. Hey, we're going to do something that appeals to today's audience. We're going to sort of clear out the continuity and start over and sort of take as modern of a twist on any of these characters as possible to make them as interesting and engaging as we can. So people seem to have really responded to it, which is great. I really appreciate that as a creator. So it's been a great niche to be playing around with, honestly.
I'm excited, and we mentioned it before we started recording. I'm kind of that individual that you speak about, where when it comes to the big two things, the kind of status quo, and there are those purists. And in many ways, I'm a purist to some characters and some titles. So like, I will sometimes fuss because Cassandra Cain is running around with white eyes as Batgirl, where I remember from No Man's Land, her costume was all black, including the eyes. And why can't we have that back? And I know you're modernizing it for a reason, but can we bring them back? But I'm also the type of reader who will also say, oh, we got a Speed Racer series coming out, and it's not exactly following the cartoon. We get a new, different take on it. This will be my last question for you.
Yeah, shoot.
So you mentioned in talking about you mentioned Dom Toretto. So I'm assuming that fans of the Fast and the Furious will love this title. Who else does Speed Racer appeal to?
Yeah, well, I want to make it clear that like we're going to follow Speed's adventures on and off the track. So this is it's still a race car book, and we're going to be following the sport of racing. I know a lot of people. Not a lot of people, but there were people who were like, "Oh, is this just going to be a street racing comic?" And that couldn't be further from the truth. We already showed our cover for issue 2, and that's Speed on a racetrack. Like this is very much. We needed to start Speed in humble beginnings before we and to establish that like he can have adventures that aren't just on a racetrack. That sort of fuels some of the crime elements that has always been an undercurrent of the Speed Racer series. Boy, I'm blank. Can you repeat that question? I just blanked on it. I lost my train of thought.
Outside of those who love the Fast and the Furious,
who's the target audience? Well, for me, honestly, like race car movies, like stuff like Days of Thunder, Gran Turismo, the Rush. What was the movie?
Gone in 60 Seconds and
what'd you say? I'm sorry.
Gone in 60 Seconds. Those types of movies.
Oh, a little less than that, but like Baby Driver.
Okay.
In terms of like kind of the stunt driving, for sure. I'm trying to remember that movie that Daniel Bruhl has been in 2 racing movies. Both of those, the upcoming Formula One movie with Brad Pitt.
Mm-hmm.
I think I imagine there's going to be a decent overlap, between those 2 books, in terms of audience. But it's ultimately like if you like car chases and if you like sports movies, Rocky and especially Creed, the Creed trilogy, huge influences on this. Like I love, sports comics. I think get a bad rap in today's direct market, although they're huge in Japan. But I kind of like that. The cachet of Speed Racer means you can tell a story like that, and having a publisher as supportive as Mad Cave means you can tell a story like that over a long term that most other publishers wouldn't be willing to take that risk. I think, it is different from some of the stories from some of the other books I've written in the past, but I think like the heart is there and the action is there. And I like to think, Speed Racer's got, I think, a more colorful rogues gallery than you might expect. And I think that kind of adds like a fun, elevated quality, along with like the Formula X cars, each of which has their own signature weapon, that sort of like elevates it from just like pure NASCAR, or pure Formula One. So yeah, I think anybody who likes like, street racing, anybody who likes race car movies, anybody who likes a good sports story, anybody who likes Speed Racer, or anybody who likes my work, with Space Ghost or Captain Planet, I think Speed Racer is some of the best writing I've done in many years. And David Tinto's artwork on it is so sensational. You saw it in our free comic book day issue. It just turned into Last Inkster issue 2 now. He's about to hop on issue 3. He's been crushing it. Just really sensational work all around. I can't say enough good things about him.
So it's Space. I'm about to say Space Ghost. Speed Racer #1 is
I do that
out
all the
at
time.
the end of it's out at the end of July. All these S's. It's
Yeah.
out at the end of July from Mad Cave Studios. The free comic book edition is out on shelves. So if you weren't able to pick up a copy at your local comic shop, try finding another one. They will still probably have copies available as well.
I believe it
It'll
might
give
be on
you
Mad Cave's digital website as well. I know they
Oh
just
yeah, you can. Yeah,
digital
now
reader.
have links to Mad Cave site, so you might be able to pick it up from there as well. It is a great introduction, not only into David's Speed Racer series, but it also gives you a little bit of Mark Russell's spinoff with Racer X because there's
Yes.
a backup story that touches on that as well. So pick it up if you can.
And those that I'll say that story, that book, it's standalone. These are original stories for Speed Racer, but they are not going to, if you didn't pick up our free comic book day issue 1 is still going to serve as an issue 1. So you don't have to pick anything up. And I believe we're talking internally to see if there's another way for people who missed out on our free comic book day issue to have easy access to it. So stay tuned. We might have more news to share about that, hopefully in the coming weeks.
Well, that'll be good to know. That'll be great to hear. David Pepose, how can fans keep up and follow you on the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at PeposeD, at David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can visit my website at davidpepose.com or subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews.
All right, well, I'll have those links in the show notes for those who want to give it a follow. As always, and I know you've been here multiple times, but I will always have a list for you. It is time for rapid fire. Let me know when you're ready. So I'm going to get this one out the way, and this might be the toughest one, and you may just say I can't do it, and that's quite okay, but I'm going to do it anyway. Chim Chim versus Blip.
Oh, Blip wins that.
All right.
He's got the neural implant, so he's smarter. Chim Chim's only hope is if he can hitch a ride in the Mach 5 and get away in time.
Hal Jordan, Kyle Rayner.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one because I grew up with Kyle. He was my Green Lantern, but also Jeff Johns' Hal Jordan is like one of my favorite superhero renditions ever. So Hal gets enough flowers as it is, so I'm going to give this one to Kyle, but that was a tough question.
Okay. Hopefully this one isn't as tough. Barry Allen, Wally West.
Wally.
All right. I'm there with you on that one. Power Girl or Supergirl?
I guess Supergirl. Excuse me. But I think Power Girl's only one excellent story away from winning that one.
Okay. The last one. Tekkaman or Hurricane Polymar? We're going manga.
I have not read so I don't know the answer to that. You got a better final question for me.
All right, let me see. All right. Okay.
It's so rare that somebody tells me some nerd stuff that I've never consumed. Now I'm like,
so there's a story behind that. So as of late, I've been doing a lot more manga reading. So I'm sorry, and I've come to find out that there are a lot of folks who are into manga than I actually realized. So I've been adding a little bit more to it when I've been doing rapid fire. So let me try this one. If you are a Robotech fan, or at least from the cartoon.
You keep hitting my blind spots. I don't know Robotech. I'm so sorry.
Okay, well, let's try one other.
Your listeners are going to be so disappointed. They're going to be like, he's not a real nerd. I'm a professional nerd.
Your socials are about to get blasted. All right, here we go. Superman or Sentry?
Oh, Superman, 100%. However, I was just thinking, I was talking with a buddy about this the other day. This is all speculation on my part. Obviously, Studios doesn't tell me anything. I'm not nearly high enough in the totem pole, but I bet that they're going to do the Thor Hyperion thing in Doomsday, but it's going to be Thor and Sentry. And actually, I'm so looking forward to that dynamic because I love the idea of like Thor being like himbo Superman and like Sentry being like neurotic nerd Superman and watching them like play off each other because they're the only ones at similar strength level. I think that's going to be an amazingly hilarious dynamic. But otherwise, beyond that, Team Superman, I think he's a wonderful, amazing character. I would love to write him someday professionally. You know, I grew up in the Midwest. I used to be a journalist. I feel a lot of kinship to Superman. So Superman all the way.
Are you excited for the crossovers?
Yeah. There's Fantastic Four and Gargoyles. That's gonna be neat. And then there's Batman and Deadpool. I think that'll be neat. And Deadpool and Batman. You know, Zeb Wells is a buddy, so I'm always thrilled to see him doing stuff. But also seeing Grant Morrison coming back.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
You
to
know,
see
I'm
what they
like,
could do.
I'm very excited. So yeah, I think those will be fun. Yeah, I love crossovers. I mean, you know, anything. I listen. I got my start writing mashup books, and I think that's a core part of my ethos. What I wouldn't do to write a crossover book. Let me put it that way. Savage Avengers started as a pitch of Conan versus the Terminator, and wound up morphing into a creator-owned book that then morphed into a Marvel book. So that stuff's in my bones. Batman versus Predator is like one of my favorite comics. That first volume rules. So yeah, I'm always down for a crossover. You can never go wrong with it. It is always worth it. No matter how the story turns out, it's always worth the swing, in my opinion.
Yeah. David Pepose, my friend, thank you so much for joining me again here at the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. See you around next time. I know I will see you in San Diego in a couple of months, so I'll be looking for you. We'll meet up and hang out, and maybe I'll bring you a soda while you're sitting at your booth.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's so good catching up.
All right, talk to you later. So again, I want to thank David Pepose for joining me here on the Comic Bin Podcast. I always enjoy having him on the show, talking about the projects that he's working on, as well as just talking comics in general. We always seem to have a good time. Again, Cable 11 Chrome, issue number 5, the final issue of that miniseries, is out on shelves. It came out this past Wednesday from Marvel Comics. If you haven't picked it up, I implore you to do so. It's a really good issue, seeing how that ended. Also out on shelves, Space Ghost number 12, which is the penultimate issue of that season over at Dynamite Entertainment. The final issue of season 1 is actually the annual. It was supposed to come out this Wednesday, actually, but of course, as we mentioned in the conversation, the issues with Diamond's bankruptcy has not only set back distribution and releases of comics over at Dynamite, but a bunch of these smaller indie comic publishers as well in the industry. So I'm hoping Dynamite is able to get those things straightened out with a new distributor so that they can go ahead and get those issues out to us. Also out on shelves is Captain Planet number 1. I really enjoyed that first issue as well. Came out a couple of weeks ago over at Dynamite. Again, me being a child of the 80s and watching cartoons in the 90s, I truly enjoy seeing not only Captain Planet, but Space Ghost and all of these other series that we've been seeing, these nostalgic cartoons that have made a comeback. And Dynamite is doing a whole bunch of them with Johnny Quest and the Herculoids, and we see Silverhawks. So there's just a whole bunch that Dynamite is doing, and I've really been enjoying all of them. So Speed Racer over at Mad Cave will be out in July, the end of July, on the 30th. So I am super stoked about that more than anything. You know, I've been a fan of Speed Racer. I have every every episode of the cartoon series on DVD. Just part of my childhood. I have a Mach 5 that still works, that sits on my shelf, right here behind the computer and the webcam. So that just goes to show how big of a big of an impact on my childhood that Speed Racers had. So I'm really excited for when that comes out. But again, thanks, David. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to have him back on. Probably have him back on after Speed Racer comes out in July, and we're able to talk a lot more about that series once the first issue is released. And I'm really excited about it. But with that being said, I want to go ahead and jump into my honorable mentions. First up, the aforementioned Cable, Love and Chrome, number 5, the final issue of that miniseries over at Marvel. Again, as I mentioned in the conversation with David, truly felt like a love lost type of ending. With Cable being able to get everything fixed and get the timeline fixed at the loss of his love, and so you kind of knew that was going to happen, but it was a really interesting story to get that we end up getting to that point. So I truly enjoyed it. Next up, over at Image, we have Dark Honor number 1, written by Ethan Sachs, K.S. Bruce, and Brian DeCubelis, with art from Fico Ocio. So when I first heard of this, it was primarily because of the art of Fico Ocio. I really became a big fan of his with the work that he did over at DC doing Black Lightning with Brandon Thomas. And so I'm really interested in seeing where this story goes after reading issue 1. Not a lot was going on, and it's set in pandemic era New York City. So I'm excited to see how this all turns out in this gang war that seems to be building up over there in this story. So I'm really interested to see where things go with Dark Honor. Over at DC Comics, we have Green Lantern number 23 from Jeremy Adams with art from Zermanico. So poor Spectre, stuck in hell. He lost Jim Corrigan as a host to latch on to, so he's been trying to find a new avatar, and he's been unable to do so. He tried to reestablish a connection to Hal, and Hal said, "Nope, I'm out of here." So hopefully before all is said and done, we will get Spectre back on the page of the comics, and he'll have a new host. And we'll see what happens next as we continue this story with the broken spectrum of the emotion spectrum that the Green Lantern Corps is trying to get fixed as they fight sorrow. Because if you're reading this, you know how it ended, as Starbreaker has made connection, and we have a new emotion that is going to be making an appearance in the form of rage. Then over at Skybound Image, we have G.I. Joe number 7 from Joshua Williamson with art from Andrea Milena. We get the first appearance of Beachhead, and I was a little thrown off because I remember a few weeks ago reading the Beachhead silent issue, and I realized that was not a part of the Energon universe. That was actually a part of the Real American Hero universe. So this is Beachhead's debut in the Energon universe. So truly enjoyed that issue. Again, everything is always good when it comes from those guys at Skybound with what they're doing with the Energon universe. And then finally, also at Skybound Image, Void Rivals number 19. And so I know you all are saying, Void Rivals is actually not in the top 5. What gives? So first off, written by Robert Kirkman with art from Connor Hughes. Excuse me, but this was more of an interlude type of story. It wasn't really set in what's been going on the last few issues with what's been going on in the land of Agoria and Zertonia with with Dalek and with Derek and Salaya, and so we get somewhat of a story with our good friend Scorzoid, and we see a lot that happens, and we see a bunch of clones, and it's a bunch of crazy, but it really didn't tie into what was going on with the story arc. It seems like it's a more of an interlude, and that's okay. But it wasn't enough to put it in the top five, which is truly something that's weird when it comes to Void Rival. It has consistently been one of my favorite books since its release, and so having it not in the top five feels weird, but I couldn't go without mentioning it at all because it was a good issue. It wasn't what I was expecting, considering what we've been getting the last few issues from the story. But it's okay to take an interlude, take a break from the main story, and I'm okay with that. So that is my honorable mentions for this past week. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into my top five. Okay, real quick, no full reviews. We're going to jump into my top five. In the number five spot, Kill Train number 5 from Olivia Quintero Briggs, with art from Martina Neosi over at Mad Cave Studios. Final issue, it ended as it should have. Vanessa makes her way off of the Kill Train alive and safely, and she does so with an unexpected companion in the form of her daughter. I really enjoyed the way it ended, and that says a lot considering I'm not that big of a fan of horror and thrillers of this sort. So again, truly enjoyed it. I really liked how it came to an end. Over at IDW in the number 4 spot, we have Star Trek Lore War Shaxs Worst Days, the one shot, written by Ryan North with art from Derek Chaum. And so, just as doing Day of Blood, this story was told in the form of Lower Decks. At least that's how it was drawn and told. But I think I think that's the best way to do it, considering how his character is, especially in the animated series. And I truly think it would not work if it was done in a way that the regular Star Trek series and Defiant has been written throughout this time here at IDW from Jackson Lansing, Colin Kelly, and Christopher Cantwell. So having Ryan North and Derek Chaum do it in the way of Star Trek Lower Decks was a good way of telling the travails that Shaxs went through in order once he was able to free his mind of Lord's control. And we get that interlude between what's going to be coming out this coming Wednesday with the final issue of Star Trek, with Star Trek 32. But that is my number 4 book, Shaxs Worst Day, which is the opposite of, again, from Day of Blood, which was Shaxs Best Day. In the number 3 spot, we go on over to Marvel Comics with Daredevil, Cold Day in Hell number 2 from writer Christopher Soule with art from Steve McNevin. I really enjoy this story. We see the entrance of Elektra into the story. She doesn't look like she's aged a bit. She made an offer to Matt to kind of give him immortal life, like she does. She hasn't aged a bit, but he kind of turns it down because he wants to solve with this mystery of what's going on. But she does introduce a new villain group, but somehow Bullseye, of course, is involved. Of course, and he has, if you read issue 1, he has Frank Castle held hostage. So we shall see how things play out as we go on into issue 3 when it comes out next month. Also, staying at Marvel in the number 2 spot, we have Ultimate Spider-Man number 17 from Jonathan Hickman with art from David Messina. So Peter now knows that Harry is alive, and Harry has asked his friend to come on home because there's a war that's about to start, and we see a whole bunch of stuff that's going on with the Mysterios, and we find out that the Mysterios are larger than what we originally expected to be. We see Gwen as one. We find out that Robbie is one. We see that just some individuals that you would not have expected to play a role in this group are considered Mysterios in this new Ultimate Universe. But we shall see how it plays out as they begin to bring this war against Winston Fisk and the group as well, the council as a whole, that are working for the Maker. But that is my number 2 book for the week. Ultimate Spider-Man number 17. That now takes us to my number 1 book for this week. And for my number 1 book, we're going over to DC Comics. Mr. Terrific, Year 1, number 1. Written by Al Letson with art from Valentin DeLandro as well as Edwin Gallman. I wasn't sure what I was expecting with this story, as they take a look at our hero Michael Holt and how he came to be who he is, and we see from the get-go he is this genius that we always know him to be. But it was a really touching story. Truly enjoyed it. The art was absolutely great. I've always been a fan of Edwin Gallman. Of course, I had to get the incentive cover that was done by Dennis Cowan. If he's on the cover, I am picking it up. I've always been a fan of his, going all the way back to the early days of Milestone. But that was a wonderful story. Truly enjoyed it. I am going to do a review and have it up on the site if you want to take a look at that. But that is my number 1 book for the week, Mr. Terrific, Year 1, number 1, over at DC Comics. And so, there you have it. My top 5 books from this past week. Kill Train, number 5, over at Mad Cave Studios. Lore War, Shaxs' Worst Day, the one-shot over at IDW. Daredevil, Cold Day in Hell, number 2, over at Marvel Comics. Also at Marvel Comics, Ultimate Spider-Man number 17. And my number 1 book for this past week, Mr. Terrific, Year 1, number 1, over at DC Comics. And that does it for this episode of the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. I want to thank you all for listening in and watching on our YouTube channel. Next week, a bunch of books are coming out in this first week of June. Over at Marvel, I'm going to be taking a look at the debut of Marvel Knights, The World to Come, number 1, from Christopher Priest and Joe Quesada. I'm really excited to see how that turns out as it focuses on the world of Wakanda. Also debuting next week is Imperial number 1 from Jonathan Hickman, as we see the Hulks in space, more or less, and I'm really looking forward to this, just to see how they handle my favorite Hulk, Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk. Also out next week, I'll be reading Storm number 9, as well as Laura Kinney, Wolverine number 7. Then also out we have Ultimate Wolverine number 6. We have another debut as Miles Morales makes his return to the Ultimate Universe with Ultimate Spider-Man Incursion number 1. We see him team up with the new version of Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe. And we also have Amazing Spider-Man number 5. So those are all going to be what I'm going to be taking a look at next week. Over at DC, we have a bunch of titles, a few titles in the Absolute Universe. We have Absolute Superman number 8 that's coming out, as well as Absolute Green Lantern number 3 that I'm going to be taking a look at. Also out, we have issue number 8 of Batgirl from Tate Bromble. And then also we have Birds of Prey number 22. And then also at DC Comics, I'm going to be looking at Secret Six number 4. I don't know why I've taken a liking to that. It started out kind of slow, but it's sort of picked up for me, so I've been enjoying that. And then we have the DC Pride 2025 #1 issue that they do every year for Pride Month. I'm going to take a look and see what's laid out in that anthology that they do every year. Then over at Titan, we have Heat Seeker Exposed. This is the latest in the Gun Honey series that Charles Ardai has been doing. Again, this is not something for the kiddos. It's very risque in the story that it tells, but it's something that I've enjoyed. Then over at Image Comics, I'm going to be reading Radiant Black #34 from Kyle Higgins, as well as issue #10 of The Moon That's Following Us. And this is it for that series from Daniel Warren Johnson and Raleigh Rossmo over at Image. Then over at IDW, we get the final issue, the final part of Lore War with Star Trek #32 from Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly. This is the final issue of Star Trek, and it all leads into Star Trek Omega, which is going to basically end it all with this current world, this current universe of Star Trek, which has been Jackson Lanzing and Colin Kelly's Star Trek, as well as Christopher Cantwell's Star Trek Defiant. You know, I've been enjoying them both. I've enjoyed Defiant more than any of them, but they both coming to an end, and it will end with the one shot Star Trek Omega, which will be coming out in a few weeks. But the final part of Lore War is out on this coming Wednesday in Star Trek #32. And then over at Mad Cave Studios, a bunch of stuff I'm reading over at Mad Cave. First up, Endless Night #1. This is a crossover from a bunch of titles, and I know you have heard me speak, and I've done a few reviews on Revolution 9, which focused on that assassin who kind of broke away from that guild or from that cult that she was under. But that was a part of a bigger universe, and now we get the crossover from those titles with Endless Night #1. Also out is Gotcha Man #10 from Cullen Bunn and Chris Batista. And yes, of course, I've always been enjoying that series. But also out from Mad Cave, we finally get the re-release of Infinity Force with volumes 1 and 2. If you can remember, I had a conversation or interview with Christian Simon, the editor, for this new release of Infinity Force. So we get volumes 1 and 2, and then in a few months we'll get volume 3, then we'll get 4, and by that time they should have everything translated, and we'll hopefully get a concrete schedule on when those issues will be out. But that's going to be out on Wednesday as well. So again, bunch of stuff that I'm going to be reading. I've already read volume 1 of Infinity Force. I've already started on volume 2, but just a whole bunch of stuff that I'm truly enjoying from the comic publishers across the board. And, you know, despite some of the craziness we've seen in the news as of late with some of the things that are looking to be happening, the stories have been good, and I hope they continue that trend. So we shall see how that all plays out, but I will see you all next time. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Bin Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_bin, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4Life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.